Let me ask you something. When you think back to Adventure Time, what do you picture? Probably Finn, right? The white hat, the little backpack, the big goofy grin, a kid who loved fighting evil and going on adventures and yelling mathematical at the top of his lungs. The ultimate optimistic hero, the guy who always got back up no matter what. That's who we thought we were watching. But here's the thing, the older I get, the more I go back and rewatch this show, the more I realize that image of Finn, the happy-go-lucky, unbreakable hero, was never really true. Not even in season 1. It was a front, a coping mechanism, wearing a bear hat, and the show was telling us that from almost the very beginning. We just weren't old enough to see it, because underneath all the mathematical moments and the dungeon crawls and the princess rescuing, Finn the human was a kid carrying around an enormous amount of pain that he had absolutely no idea how to process. And Adventure Time, this goofy cartoon about a boy and his magic dog, spent 10 seasons quietly documenting what that does to a person. So today I want to talk about what the show was actually saying about Finn, about growing up, and about what it really means to be a hero when you can barely hold yourself together. Let's go back to the very beginning. And I mean the actual beginning, not episode 1. The show gives us Finn's origin in pieces and deliberately spaces them out across multiple seasons so you don't fully feel the weight of it until you've already fallen in love with him, which is a genius move by the writers, honestly, because by the time you understand what happened to this kid, you're already too emotionally invested to look away. Here's what we know. Finn was abandoned as a baby, left alone in the middle of a forest. The show gives us this image of him as a tiny infant just lying there while people walked past and actively told each other not to look at him, not stay away because it's dangerous, not, oh, how sad, just don't look at him. That is a brutal thing to put in a cartoon. And the show doesn't linger on it. It doesn't make it a whole dramatic moment. It just drops it in there quietly and moves on, which somehow makes it worse because that's kind of what trauma does in real life too, isn't it? It doesn't always announce itself. It just sits there in the background quietly shaping everything. From that moment forward, Finn vowed that he would help anyone who needed it, so that no one would ever feel what he felt lying in that forest. That is not the origin story of a happy, well-adjusted kid who loves adventure. That is the origin story of someone who is terrified of feeling worthless, who needs to be needed in order to feel like he exists. His heroism was never just heroism, it was a survival strategy. And then there's the other half of it, the part that doesn't show up until much later in the series and hits even harder when it does. Billy tells him that his biological father is alive. And Finn, this kid who has spent his entire life wondering where he came from, who has felt like an outsider in a world full of magical creatures and talking dogs his whole life, latches onto that information like it is the most important thing he has ever heard. Because for him, it is. This is the missing piece, the explanation for everything, the reason he has always felt slightly outside of a world that wasn't built for him. And then he meets Martin, and Martin sucks. I've done a whole breakdown on Martin's character, so I won't go too deep here. But what matters for Finn's story is not Martin's character, it's Finn's reaction to him. Because even when it becomes obvious pretty quickly that this guy is a self-serving, manipulative deadbeat who doesn't have a single parental instinct in his entire body, Finn keeps trying. He keeps reaching. He keeps looking for something in Martin that is simply not there. And Finn just absorbs that in the way that kids who desperately want a parent's approval absorb things that should destroy them. He doesn't explode. He doesn't shut down completely. He just keeps trying to connect with someone who will never, ever meet him halfway. That's not heroism. That's an abandoned kid doing what abandoned kids do, convincing themselves that if they just try hard enough, the person who left will finally decide they were worth staying for. Now let's talk about the romantic arcs, because I know some people roll their eyes at the Finn and Bubblegum and Finn and Flame Princess stuff. They see it as just standard cartoon love interest material. But if you look at how Finn actually behaves in these relationships, there is something going on that is way more psychologically specific than just a kid having a crush. With Princess Bubblegum, Finn fixates hard and for a long time, even after she is pretty clear that she doesn't see him that way. Even after the Too Young situation where she essentially tells him that what they had was temporary and he needs to move on, he keeps circling back. He shows up to her diplomatic dinner uninvited, pretending Jake didn't want to come. He keeps a lock of her hair. He tries to recreate moments they shared when she was 13, as if somehow repeating the past will change the outcome. That is not normal crush behavior. That is the behavior of someone who is terrified of abandonment, so they hold on to any connection they've made with both hands and refuse to let go even when the other person has already walked away. Sound familiar? Because it should. It's the same thing he does with Martin. Finn doesn't just like Bubblegum. He needs her to choose him because being chosen would mean something. It would mean he's worth choosing. And every time she doesn't, it quietly reinforces the thing that's been living in him since that forest. Then comes Flame Princess, and at first it looks like exactly what Finn needs. Someone his age, someone who actually likes him back, a fresh start away from the weird, complicated Bubblegum dynamic, and it is good. For a while it genuinely is, but then Finn does something that I think reveals more about his psychology than almost anything else in the show. He manipulates her. He engineers conflict between her and Ice King repeatedly because the dream he gets from it is addictive, and when it all falls apart and FP breaks up with him, he is completely blindsided by the consequences. Not because he's evil, not because he's a bad person, but because Finn at this point in his life is so emotionally underdeveloped, so deep in his own pain and his own needs, that he genuinely could not see past them far enough to recognize he was hurting someone else. That's the thing about growing up with unprocessed trauma. It doesn't make you malicious, it makes you myopic. You're so focused on your own wound that you accidentally create wounds in the people around you without even realizing it's happening. And the show doesn't let him off the hook for it, which is exactly right. Let's talk about the ocean, because the ocean is one of those details that seems like a throwaway character quirk in the early seasons and then gradually reveals itself to be one of the most carefully constructed pieces of symbolism in the entire show. Finn is terrified of the ocean, irrationally, completely, can barely function near it terrified, and the show personifies this fear as the fear feaster, this obnoxious little cloud that crawls out of his belly button and whispers to him that because he's afraid he'll never be a true hero. Now, on the surface, that's a fun, weird Adventure Time image, but think about what the ocean actually represents in the context of everything else we know about Finn. The ocean is vast and dark and deep and full of things you can't see or control. It is the unknown. It is the thing that swallows you whole if you're not careful. And Finn was a baby alone in a forest. He grew up never knowing where he came from. He spent his whole life in a world that wasn't built for his species. He found his father, and his father was a void. The ocean isn't just an ocean, it's everything he has never been able to face about his own story. The Fear Feaster tells him he might never be a true hero, and some part of Finn believes it. Not because he's weak, but because some part of him has always believed on the deepest possible level that he is fundamentally not enough. That if people really knew him, really saw all of it, they'd walk past just like they did in that forest. He doesn't conquer the ocean for a long time, and even when he does, it's messy and imperfect, and the grass sword has to basically slap him in the face to get there, which is honestly the most real depiction of overcoming a deep fear I've ever seen in a cartoon. It's not a triumphant moment of pure will. It's a guy who is barely holding it together, getting dragged across the finish line by his own subconscious. Which brings us to season 6. And I have to be honest with you, season 6 Finn is genuinely hard to watch sometimes. Not because he's unlikable, but because if you've ever been through a period of your life where everything falls apart at once, you will recognize every single thing he does in these episodes with a clarity that is deeply uncomfortable. He loses his arm trying to hold on to a father who was already gone before Finn even reached him. He spends an episode building a tower into space fueled entirely by rage and grief. He kisses a bunch of random princesses trying to feel something and feels nothing. He lets a bee follow him around because at least it's company. He ends up in the worst headspace we've ever seen him in, and the show frames it not as a dramatic breakdown, but as something quieter and more unsettling than that. He just stops feeling things. I guess I don't feel anything. That line said completely flatly by a kid who spent the first 5 seasons of the show feeling everything at maximum volume. A kid who cried openly, who got angry openly, who loved people with everything he had. And now he's just empty. That's not a villain arc. That's not even a classic hero's fall. That's depression depicted in a children's cartoon with more accuracy than a lot of content made specifically for adults about the same subject. And the show doesn't rush him out of it. It lets him sit there. It lets the flower on his arm wilt. It lets him be not okay for a sustained period of time, because that's what it actually looks like. You don't bounce back from losing your father twice, once to abandonment and once to a literal cosmic entity diary in the span of a few episodes. You just don't. Breezy is the episode I always point people to when they ask me how dark Finn's arc actually gets, because on the surface it looks almost comedic. Finn wandering around making out with random princesses while a bee follows him around developing feelings for his flower arm. Classic weird Adventure Time. But strip away the weirdness and what you have is a teenager who is so emotionally shut down that he is going through the motions of human connection purely mechanically, hoping that something will trigger a feeling, any feeling. He's not even looking for happiness at this point. He'll take anything. He just wants to confirm he's still in there somewhere. And then LSP happens, and the show handles that scene in the most deliberately ambiguous way possible. And I'm not going to spend too long on it, except to say that whatever actually happened in that moment, the aftermath is a kid who looks like someone turned the lights off behind his eyes. His flower loses a petal. He's hit some kind of bottom. It's only when Breezy's song reaches him, when something genuinely beautiful and external breaks through the fog, that the flower grows back, that he gets his arm back, that something in him resurfaces. And I think that moment is actually the most important thing the show says about Finn's entire arc, that the thing that saves him is not his own heroism. It's not him powering through. It's not a triumphant act of will. It's someone else's kindness landing on him at the exact moment he needed it most and cracking something open. For a show about a hero, Adventure Time is remarkably honest about the fact that sometimes you cannot save yourself. Sometimes you need to be the one who gets saved. By the time we get to the finale, Finn is 16, and he is not the same kid who was yelling mathematical and body slamming evil in season 1. He is someone who has been through abandonment and obsession and manipulation and loss and grief and a period of total emotional shutdown, and come out the other side of all of it still standing, still choosing to help people, still showing up, not because he's invincible, not because he's the classic unbreakable hero, but because after everything, after all of it, he made a choice, the same choice he makes every day, to keep going, to keep caring, to keep being present in a world that has given him every reason to check out. That's the thing about Finn that I think the show was always trying to say, and that I don't think gets talked about enough. If this hit different for you, leave a like. It genuinely helps more than you'd think. Subscribe if you're new, because this is exactly the kind of content I make, and there's a lot more of it coming. I'll catch you in the next one.